Today is December 1st, 2023. We are interviewing Suli Chenkin. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Chenkin is in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am in Henderson, Nevada, and the language will be English. Today is December 1st, 2023. We are interviewing Suli Chenkin. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Chenkin is in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am in Henderson, Nevada. The language will be English. We're in the United States of America. Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name and can you please spell it?
Shulamit, Shulamit, Baikovitz, Baicovitz, Chenkin, Chenkin.
And you have a nickname that you go by?
Yes, my nickname is Suli, Suly.
And what was your name at birth?
Shulamit Alexandra Baikovich.
Could you spell that for us, please?
Shulamit, Alexandra, Alexandra, Baikovich, Baikovich.
Where were you born?
I was born in Kaunas, Lithuania, known by the Jews as Kovno.
And when were you born?
On October 3rd, 1940.
And how old are you today?
83 years old.
How long had your family lived in Lithuania? Many generations?
My family goes back many, many generations in Lithuania.
Did you have a large family? Can you tell us about your family, please?
Yes, my father was one of 7 siblings, and my mother was one of 9 siblings. So it was a large family.
What do you know about Jewish history in Kovno?
What I know about Jewish history is that Kovno was a very, very avant-garde kind of city. It was very into Art Deco, both in furniture and architecture, that it had 40 synagogues by the time I was born, that out of a population of about 125,000 people, some 40,000, 38,000 to 40,000 were Jewish.
What was your father's name?
Zalman.
And what did he do for a living?
My father was what you would call today like a controller.
And your mother's name?
My mother's name was Riva, and she was a secretary bookkeeper.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I don't have any brothers or any sisters.
How old were you when the Nazis invaded?
I was 8 months old.
So we can assume you don't remember that, but what are some of your earliest childhood memories?
My earliest childhood memories are already, of course, in the ghetto. And we got into the ghetto when I was about 10 months old. And I remember our little room that I shared with my parents. And I remember the very first time that I felt that something was not right in my life. And that I must have been about 3 years old then.
Would you please elaborate on that?
Well, I think I was a happy little child. We lived in a house with like another 8 families, and there was a child that was a few years older than me. That was my playmate. I don't remember being unhappy. I was quite happy, except that one particular day, and I think we might have been at my uncle's house because we were in an upstairs and second or third floor. And the grown-ups were around the dining area table, and they were whispering to each other, and I was bored, so I walked over to the window. And that particular apartment overlooked an open courtyard. And I looked out the window and I saw this men. There were a lot of men standing there, and they had this big, enormous coats with epaulets on the shoulders, and some of them had dogs, big dogs on leashes, and rifles. And I got very scared that something very bad was going to happen. And then somebody grabbed me by my dress and pulled me away from the window. And I realized at that moment, something is not right.
What do you remember of the living conditions in the ghetto? You mentioned there were many people in this building.
Yes,
Many families.
it was a house, and I don't remember much of anything else but our bedroom. I remember that and the back door of the house, where I went into like a yard. I don't remember any of the people other than my parents and my cousin who lived with us, who was about 17, 18 years old. I don't remember my grandmother, and don't just try to, but I can't envision her. I really don't remember even going out on the street, although I did. I do remember my mother taking me for walks. Probably was the last summer that I was there, and running down the hill to grab a wildflower and bringing it back to me.
Do you remember feeling hungry or cold or anything? Do you have any physical memories, if not, mental images of those days in the ghetto?
Well, I don't remember feeling hungry. I remember being sick. I remember being sick and having cupping, bankes, they call it in Yiddish. And one of them took, and I remember it hurt. So I remember coughing. My parents told me I had measles and coughing and all kinds of diseases, but even without medicines, I managed to survive them.
You told us about your experience looking out the window and feeling something was not right. Was that the only time you remember feeling that you might have been in danger?
I think I felt in danger also from the fact my father worked like everybody else did in the ghetto. My father had the position of being in charge of the bread distribution in the ghetto. And it was a very hard job because you really had to keep books as if you were in a multi-million dollar corporation. You had to get in every ounce of flour that was sent out to be baked, every ounce of bread that was brought into the place, and every slice that was given out. And people would come and try to bribe my father into giving them more bread for whatever valuables they had managed to hide from the Nazis. And my father would say no, because never took a bribe, because he always said, sorry, but if I give you more, I'm taking away from somebody else. And he didn't take an extra piece of bread even for me, his baby. So without aiming to, he had gained the respect and liking of his boss. The man's name was Pfiffinger. And this man would come to our house after business hours and sit down and talk to my father. And I remember being afraid of him.
Why?
Well, I guess he had a uniform. He looked very different. My father was very respectful of him, and he was a Deutsch. I didn't know the word Nazi. I knew the word in Yiddish, a Deutsch. And we had to hide from the Deutsch, not get in their way.
He was a German.
Yes.
Were there other children around that you remember being with, and do you know what happened with them?
I don't remember the other children as seeing them, but I do know what happened to them. I know that one of them, who was like, to my 3 years old, she was like 6 or 9. I don't remember exactly. But she survived also. And she got in touch with me when we were both already in our 60s. And she lived in Israel. And there was one person that I remembered, and she was like maybe 12 or 13. And I was in touch with her until she died in Israel years ago. And saw her many times there.
Sorry, do you remember their names?
Yes. The one that was 13 was Rochale Fagin, and got married. Her name was Libowitz. And the other one was Reza Lefin.
What else stands out in your mind about your time in the ghetto?
Stands out is the Kinderaktie. That is the one that I remember very, very well. And this took place on March 27th, 1944. Yes. And I remember being woken up, and I really wanted to keep on sleeping. And so I was ready to start throwing a fit. I was 3.5 years old. And I saw my father's face, and there was such terror reflected on his face that I got very, very scared. And I remember he picked me up, and we walked out of our little room into the main room, and people were like shuffling from one side of the room to the other. Nobody was saying a word, but I could feel the terror. And we walked over to a staircase, and I remember my mother bending down and picking up a slab of wood from one of the stairs, and there was this round, dark hole. And then my mother jumped through the hole. And the next thing I knew, I was over that hole. My father had me. He was handing me to my mother. Her arms were outstretched towards the opening, and he handed me to her. And I remember I hit my head. I mean, very, very badly. And it hurt a lot. And then my mother's hand was over my mouth, and her mouth was right in my ear, whispering, begging me not to cry, telling me that she knew, I know, she said, I know it hurts a lot, but please, please don't cry, because if you do, the schlechte Deutschen, the bad Germans, they will hear us and they will come and they will kill us. And so I didn't cry. And then I just remember being in my mother's arms, sitting on some dirt floor, and I was like kind of passed out. The next thing I knew, it was steps. I heard them screaming, yelling, carrying on, German. And I don't remember anything else. I don't remember coming out of the hole, but I understand that we were there for 2 days. They didn't find us, and they walked away. They had come in and had a Ukrainian aide who lifted an axe over my father's head and yelled at him to take him to the hiding place. I know that you Jews have bunkers and hiding place all over. Take me or I'll cut your head off. We were very lucky. The house we were in had what they had at that time was an ice cellar when there was no refrigeration. There were houses that had cellars deep in the ground where people kept their perishables with chunks of ice in the summer. So this house had an ice cellar. We had no food to put there, but my father took them there, and they really destroyed the cellar with their axes and picked up floors and walls, and they didn't find anything, and they walked away. But I know that they took over 2,500 children out of the ghetto in those 2 days. After that, my parents realized that time had come, that a decision had to be made, and I had to be taken out of the ghetto.
I just have a couple of questions. Were you and your mother the only ones in that hole?
No, my grandmother was in the hole, and there was that Reza Lefin was in that hole too, with her mother.
You use the German word, a Kinderaktion. Can you explain what that was?
The Nazis used the word Aktie, which I translate as action. It was really the word, I think, stands for raid. It's a raid on the children.
Were any of the children that you knew taken that day?
None of the children that I personally know of were taken, but I know that, like I said, a lot of children under the age of 12 were taken out, and that there were no children left in the ghetto, visibly left in the ghetto. Um, I spoke to Rezale on the phone about that years ago, and we compared, what happened right after. And of course, she was much older than me, so she remembered more. Her I knew that if the front door opened in our house after the Kinderaktie, I mean, you didn't lock your door, so it could open at any time. And if the person who was coming in wouldn't identify themselves immediately, you run and hide. And she remembered hiding under the covers in the bed with lots of pillows and covers. I remember like kind of hiding under the bed.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about that experience?
It's somehow, when I tell it, I almost can relive it. And it was for me really the beginning of my journey. And because after that, my parents, like I said, realized that time was of the essence. And we had been lucky. It was the reason that we did have a hiding place, which saved my life, was because my father had been forewarned by the Lithuanian woman who had been my nanny the first 8 months of my life. She had come to the ghetto fence and asked to see my father, and told him that relatives of hers had come from another city in Lithuania, Ponevezh, and had told her that there they had conducted such a raid and taken out children under the age of 12, and that he should do something to hide me or save me. And he asked her, would you take her? I'll get her out of the ghetto. Would you take her and take care of her? And she ran away. And you couldn't blame her, because harboring a Jew was punishable by death, not only to you, but your entire family. But she did forewarn us. And that's how this, what they call the Malina, a bunker, was, excavated and readied for the occasion.
Were you able to, I realize you were a child, were you able to detect a change in the atmosphere of the ghetto after that children's action?
Well, I don't know if the atmosphere of the ghetto as much as the fact that in the house there was a change in the atmosphere. First of all, I got a teacher that started teaching me how to speak Lithuanian in preparation. The Nazis stopped coming to our house, Pfiffinger. He knew by my father's demeanor that I had not been taken away, because my father went to work the next day. And not a word was said. But he knew that I had not been taken away, and he did not want to be a witness to that information. So he just stopped coming. I started being brainwashed. I was being told over and over again that I would have to be given away. I would have to be, I would just would not be with my parents. Somebody was going to take care of me. They had to send me away. My parents said, "We love you very much, but again, the bad Nazis, they want to kill everybody that is Jewish, and we are going to send you away, and if we can, we will come and get you one day." And I don't know how much of it I could understand. I was a little over 3. But my parents, when I told me that when I would see them talking to one another, very like whispering, I would come over and say to them, "Don't send me out tomorrow. There will be a better guard the day after." So maybe I understood some of it. But when it did happen, it was shocking. My
One more
parents.
question before we go on to the next stage of your experience. Up until this point, had you seen any violence, any death personally, or had you been shielded?
I had been shielded.
Okay. And so what was their plan now to save you?
Well, my parents were looking for somebody, and the plan was to teach me how to speak Lithuanian, get me brainwashed, and then find a safe place. And you can imagine it was a terrible risk, terrible, because there were times when people, the news came back to the ghetto. Every bit of news came back. People were going out in work gangs to work outside the ghetto, and they would bring in all kinds of news with them. And Pfiffinger also, when he came, told my father of all the worldly news that was going on. He knew when America went into the war and when the Russians were winning the war. And so it was a lot of information. How do you ready a child that is a little over 3.5 years old to be just given away? And it was a tremendous risk because there were some people, at this point, the Nazis had realized what people in the ghetto were doing, and they had planted people that were Gestapo to pose as charitable Lithuanians who would save a Jewish child. So it was really very touch and go. My father told me that he had been told about a woman that would be willing to take a child in. And I have to mention that Pfiffinger aided my father's quest, because he would give him safe conduct under all kinds of pretenses of looking for more flour or looking for this, for baking the bread, to go out to the Christian side, the free side of the city, and interview people. So he would give him a safe conduct with a friendly guard and allow my father to do this. He knew my father was going to come back because I was still in the ghetto. So he went and he interviewed this woman who was a wonderful, wonderful candidate, because she lived in a farm, meaning outside of the city where you were not subject to curious people. And she, was a good woman and had children. And my father took my photograph with him. And she said, "Okay, I'll take her in, but I need money. Because, you people are finished. You are all going to die, and I'm going to have to raise your child as mine, and I'm going to have to send her to school, and I'm going to have to marry her off. I'm not going to take away from my children to give yours." So I need money. Well, we had nothing left, nothing to even go and barter in the black market. So my father was very, very despondent because she was going to be such a good, she posed hardly any risk. But then he hears about this woman who is placing children with Lithuanians who are willing to risk their lives. And she assures that she's going to be like on top. She's going to really control this, where the children go and how they're faring. The only trouble is that this person is a very bad risk because not only is she Jewish herself, she is the Rebbetzin of the Slobodka Yeshiva. And how is she going to pass for a worldly, non-Jewish person in a world that she hardly has ever encountered? But Miriam Schulman was a very special person who had seen what was going on, that this was the end. And she had gone out of the ghetto on a constant basis with a work gang. And she had gone and she had spoken to one of the main priests, Catholic priest in Kovno. And she had said to him, you're a man of God and I'm a woman of God. And you must help me to save Jewish children. And he did help. And she got people. And so she placed many children with Lithuanians who were willing to risk their life. When my father heard about her, he never met her. My parents never met Miriam, but had to entrust me because he knew from Pfiffinger that the Nazis were losing their battle, their war with the Russians, and they were going to have to start retreating, and they were not going to leave any Jews in Kovno.
I have two questions for you before we go further. Can you explain what Rebbetzin means?
Yes, it's the wife of a rabbi.
And do you happen to know the name of the priest with whom she spoke?
Right offhand, I don't remember.
That's fine. Okay, please continue. What happened next?
What happened next was, okay, so I'm being taught how to speak Lithuanian and I'm being brainwashed. And the next thing is that the day came when I had to be given away. And I remember being woken up from a nap, and I was dressed, and I had what to me was a new coat. I'm sure it wasn't new, but to me it was. And I remember it had a fur collar because when I felt the fur against my cheek and I liked it. And I had been given something to put me to sleep. But for a moment, I woke and I opened my eyes and I saw my father sobbing. And I couldn't understand why he was crying. And then mercifully, I just blacked out. As they were placing me into a sack, I felt that the roughness of the sack. And the next thing I knew, I woke up. But what had happened was that I was placed in a sack, and that sack was placed on a cart atop other sacks that contained potatoes. And my father had a signed order that he gave the driver of the cart. The signed order allowed this cart to go to the grinding mill in the outskirts of the ghetto to make potato flour, to bake potato bread. And of course, my father's boss didn't know about this operation. Nobody did. And we lived at that time right next to the German quarters. So it was right under the noses of the officers that I was smuggled out of the ghetto. And my uncle went on that cart with the driver, and they went to the outskirts of the ghetto. And at a certain point, it had been prearranged. On the other side of the barbed wire stood Miriam Schulman with a young Christian girl by the name of Albina. I do not know her last name. And the cart made an unscheduled stop. They took my bag and gently threw it over the barbed wire. The women ran towards it, tore the sack open, put me in a carriage, and wheeled me away to what everyone hoped was a chance to live. And then the next thing I knew, I woke up in a basement. And that was pretty tough, because I knew I was in a place I had never been before, and I started crying. Then somebody came down and picked me up and took me upstairs to a living area and sat me on a sofa. And that was the first time I saw Miriam. And Miriam had a deck of cards and tried to play cards with me. And I just kept crying and carrying on. And I guess I finally got too tired and went to sleep. But I knew Miriam was Jewish. Somehow I knew this, felt it, because the next thing I remember is that after days of being inside the house, she took me outside and I saw a chicken in the yard. And I pointed to the chicken and I said in Yiddish, "Yibakuka hindale, take a look, it's a chicken." And Miriam's eyes opened like saucers, and she started saying in Lithuanian, "Speak in Lithuanian, speak in Lithuanian." I could have given us away. And then I stayed with Albina for the rest of the time. And it was not a very long time. I was given away on May 11th, 1943. And I'm sorry, is it 1944? It's May 11th, 1944. And the Russians came in on August 1st into Kovno. But the ghetto had been burned and dynamited to the ground. There was nothing left. And the inmates had been taken out. The ones that were left, and I understand that there were only about 6,600 by that time. The original amount of people had come into the ghetto was 38,000. But about 6,600 had been taken to the train station. And all the men had been sent to Dachau concentration camp, and all the women to Stutthof concentration camp, among them my mother and father. I was free.
What were some of the challenges you had to overcome now in your new situation outside the ghetto?
Well, the first thing was that I was constantly afraid. I was heartbroken. I was only 3.5 years old, and I did not see one familiar face. I did not like Albina, and I don't think she liked me very much, but when I put myself today in her shoes, she was 18 years old with a crybaby, you know, a hysterical little child to take care of. And she sent me to her mother's. She would take me to her mother's, who lived in the outskirts of the city. And her mother was very kind to me. But I was constantly afraid and heartbroken. So it was pretty tough. And I then, when the Russians came in and we were liberated, then I went to live with Miriam. Miriam had placed a lot of children, among them cousins of mine, 3 cousins, male cousins. 2 of them survived in hiding. 1 of them was given up by the family who had taken him in. He had been taken to the Gestapo. But the other 2 made it, and she took all the children she had placed to the Jewish orphanage. But
I have to apologize. You froze for a moment, so I didn't hear everything you said. So if this is a repetition of something you just said, I apologize. Can you give me the names of your cousins that were also hidden?
yes.
Do you remember their names?
Yes, of course. Yes, one of them was Eddie Levner. The other one is Joseph Gillis. And the third one, the one that did not make it, Hirschale Levner.
And were you at any time given a false name?
Yes. Yes, my name was Sabina.
Is there anything else about this time period that you want to share before we move on?
No, it just was. Yeah, my cousin, Abrasha, who lived with us before the Nazis came in, and then in the ghetto, he did not go to Dachau. He and some other boys, they were about 18, stayed in the ghetto. And when the Nazis, just burnt it down and dynamited it, they made a run across the river, and he saved his life and went into hiding. And shortly thereafter, when the Russians came, he came out of hiding. He came to see me. And I remember that day, and it was the first person that I knew that I saw. I remember how hysterical, crying, and he promised he would come back, but he didn't. And he had lost his whole family, his parents and his siblings. And I didn't see him again until years later, when my parents and I had arrived in Cuba, and then about 2 years later, he came to Cuba too.
We'll get to Cuba in a few minutes. Please share with us what you remember of the Russians' liberation.
I don't remember I don't remember seeing any soldiers. I guess I wasn't out in the street for too long. All I know is one moment I was with Albina, and the next moment that I remember is being with Miriam. Miriam had her children in hiding, so she picked them up, her 2 daughters and her son. And I don't remember the son so much being with us as her 2 girls. And we all lived in a house. And I felt safe there. I felt much safer. And then Miriam's husband, the rabbi, he wasn't with us because when the war broke out, when the Nazis came in, he was in New York trying to raise money to buy certificates for the yeshiva students. So he was cut off from her and she was on her own. And so she realized that the Iron Curtain was going to come down and that we were going to be stuck and that we needed to get out and try to get to Palestine, where her parents were and where her husband would ultimately be coming to. And so we started our trek in January of 1945, at the end of January, our trek to get out of Lithuania, get out of the Russian sector, and go towards, try to get to Palestine.
Can you please take us on that journey with you?
That journey I remember very well. It was very cold. I remember the mounds and mounds of snow. We first went to Poland and we went to Lublin. And it was very bad in Lublin. There was still shooting and partisans. So we left Lublin and we went to Lodz. And then we returned to Lublin. And it was horrific because we had no documents, very little money. Like I said, there was chaos all over. They were constantly asking for papers, documents. Miriam was an unbelievable person. I really don't know where she got her savvy from, but she would have somebody teach us a song in the language of the country we were in, because we went to Czechoslovakia and we went to Hungary and Romania. And whenever we were asked for papers, we would break out in the song in the language of the country we were in. So of course, if children are singing in Polish, they have to be Polish, so they have good documents, and they would walk away. But it was a scary time because we were not supposed to talk and we were not supposed to, we hid in gardens during the day. We slept in cemeteries at night. Oh, during the day we were in the cemeteries. At night we were trying to find some shelter. And the worst part is that somehow I got lost from Miriam. That was this very, very scary time. And it gets very complicated. I really couldn't find out exactly what happened until I reunited with Miriam so many years later. And I started having flashbacks about that time. And she left me with these ladies at a train station because she needed to get some false documents and she'd be right back. And how can you walk around with so many children? She was her own children, somebody else's. We were hordes of people and big groups. And so the Russians came in to the train station and asked these two women for papers. They didn't have any. So they put us on a train that was going back to the Russian sector. That particular train that they put us on was going to Siberia. Luckily, King Carol and Stalin made peace in the next few days, and the train was diverted and turned around and went back to some place in Romania. Don't ask me the name of the village because I never asked Miriam and I don't know. But it was some place in a village, and we got there, and I was in a displaced persons camp for days in this big, enormous, it looked like a palace. But this isn't. There were people sleeping on the floor and, and I was sleeping on the floor. And I don't know how many days I was there, but I was adopted by a Romanian couple. And they were not Jewish because that Sunday they took me to church. They were a very, very handsome couple. They took me to a beautiful house. I slept in a very comfortable bed that I had not slept in such a bed in I don't know how long. I remember the house had mirrors all over. Never seen anything like it. She was very pretty, he was handsome, they were very blonde, and they smiled a lot because we didn't speak a word that the other one could understand. And all of a sudden, Miriam was there. She found me.
Before you go too much further, do you remember the name of this couple that wanted to adopt you?
No.
During this time, did you have any idea what had happened to so many of the Jews in Europe under the Nazis? Did you know about the death camps or anything at this point?
No. Had no idea. I was not even 5.
And do you have any idea how Miriam found you?
Well, she told me the story. She reenacted it when I met her again in 1961. She told me that she found out where this train was. Somehow people knew exactly what was happening, even without an internet or cell phones. And she knew, and there was a train going to that particular place, and she got on it without a permit, without anything, and she reenacted how she managed to intimidate the conductor not to take her off the train. And she got to the village, and she went to the displaced persons camp and asked if there had been a child, and they said yes, and they gave her the information. And she went and came to the house, and these people were very nice. I remember they gave us their bedroom so Miriam and I could sleep in the bed, and they realized, I ran to her, so they realized she was so-called my mother. And then she told me that she went into the village and started talking to people and found out that there was a boy that was Jewish that also had been adopted. And then I met him many years later in New York, and he told me the whole story. And he said that he was like 12 years old or 11, and she said, "Do you want to stay here, or do you want to remain a Jew and come with me to Israel, then still Palestine?" And he opted to come, and she got him there too. So that's how I was reunited.
I'm sorry. You want to finish what you were saying?
That's how I got reunited, and we went back to Bucharest, and that's where I start remembering things very clearly. I turned 5 in Bucharest, and I remember my first sukkah, and then at the end of that month, we went to Constanza and we boarded the ship to Palestine.
Before we leave Europe completely, I'd like to take a break and have you think, is there anything else about this period of time that we haven't discussed that you want to share with us?
Well, the one thing that that I have not discussed was the fact that when we first got into the ghetto, there was the big action on October 28th of 1941, and that of the people that came in there, they took out, they had asked all of the ghetto population to come into this open square and stand by family units. And for hours, they selected people. And they selected mostly children and the elderly and the handicapped and the sick. And they right away took out 10,000 people and sent them to one of the forts, whether they shot them there or send them someplace else. I'm not clear 100%. I don't think anybody is. And decimated almost half of the population, of the Jewish population that came into the ghetto. And what my parents told me was that they had stood there for some 10 hours in the cold, and that taking turns in holding me. And that when they came back they were finally released to go back to their houses, the first thing they went to do was change my diaper, and it was totally dry. I think I was so frightened I was just a year old. And I think that's when my history starts.
At this point, did you have any idea where your parents were or what had happened to them?
No. I still remembered them. I remembered my parents. But when Miriam asked me, do you remember your parents? And I remember that moment that she asked me, I turned my head around and I didn't say anything. I didn't want to lie to her and say no, but I couldn't tell anybody the truth because my parents over and over again had said, don't ever ask for us. Don't ever, if anybody mention us, you don't know what they're talking about. Now, how do you tell a 5-year-older who is in a destroyed city where walls are falling down and ceilings are non-existent, of big, enormous buildings, in my eyes, where there are tanks running up and down the streets, where there are soldiers with machine guns? How do you tell a child the war is over? I had no inkling the war was over. So I wasn't going to talk about my parents. So I kept mute, not answering any questions until I set one foot in Israel.
Let's take a break for a couple minutes before we move on to Israel.
Okay.
So we'll cut and take a quick break. Okay, we're about to go to Israel. Is there anything else you want to mention before we leave Europe?
There is the very beginning, when the Nazis came into Kovno. It happened the actual attack happened on a Sunday morning. I mean, in the early hours of Sunday, and in June, and it was the Nazis had broken their pact, their non-aggression pact with Russia, and they had attacked Russia by coming into Lithuania. So Monday came and my nanny did not show up, and we were running out of milk for me. So by Tuesday, it was decided that my parents and my grandmother and my cousin, we would all go to my grandfather's farm, which was about a few miles out of the city and in the outskirts, and that it would be safer because the Lithuanian people, the non-Jews, were breaking down Jewish stores and attacking Jewish people and killing Jewish people, and there was a very big anti-Semitism in Lithuania. And so we would be safer at my grandfather's farm. My grandfather boasted with his good relationship with his non-Jewish neighbor farmers. So it was decided that we would all walk through the city in the back streets, and that my mother would be the one to carry me because she was the one who looked less Jewish, that she would walk a few steps ahead of them, and if they were stopped, she would keep on walking with me towards safety. And we got to my grandfather's house safe and sound, and everybody was very happy to see us. A lot of the family members were there, and also the neighbors, and two of the neighbors and their son. And after a while, after eating and relaxing, my father said to my mother, "I don't like the atmosphere in this house. I don't trust these people, the neighbors. When I speak to them, they do not look me in the face. They avert their eyes. I want to leave now." My mother said to him, "You're crazy. You're very nervous about the situation, rightly so, but these people are friends. My father said, "You want to stay, you stay. I'm taking my family and the baby out of here." So, of course, my mother went with him, and they went back to the city. And it was maybe an hour or so after we had left that the so-called neighbor showed up, the friend, with the militia, the Lithuanian partisans, and they took my grandfather, his two sons, and his son-in-law, and they took them to one of the fortresses, the 7th fort, where they killed everybody they took in the next few days. And that's how the nightmare of the Holocaust started for my family.
And do you know what year that was?
Excuse me?
The year that
The
was.
year, yes, that was 1941, June of 1941. The Nazis had not come in yet to the city.
Before the break, we were about to start your voyage to Palestine, to Israel.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that trip? You got as far as saying you boarded a ship. What happened?
Well, I got on board of the ship and we were sleeping on the floor. And it was very scary for me to be on the ship because I had never seen the ocean. And in my eyes, the ship was enormous. And there were people all over the place, and it probably was choppy. I don't remember that very much, but we finally got to Palestine, and it was close to Shabbat. It was the Sabbath was coming, so we stayed on the ship, Miriam and us, and we left, I guess, on Sunday. We came to Haifa, and I found out later, because I had visions of it, and I figured maybe I'm imagining it, but I had visions of how I disembarked that ship, and it was they didn't have the boats on Sunday. They weren't going to lower down boats for a few people. So I don't know how Miriam got on this small boat, but I was hoisted down with a rope. I remember her arms outstretched to grab me. It took me 30 years to go on a cruise because it was so frightening, the idea of getting on and off a boat. But anyways, I remember coming into Haifa, and I remember getting on the pier, and all these people who had come to see the miracle of, children who had been saved from Hitler. And, all the time that we were traveling in Europe, and it was so tough on us, we children were kept saying with the promise that we were going to the land of milk and honey. We were going to have everything. Once we got there, we were not going to have to be afraid anymore. We were going to have chocolate, whatever that was. We never tasted peace. We were going to be free and safe. So I figured in my mind, land of milk and honey, it's going to deliver my parents. They're going to be there. The promised land. So not being able to discuss this with anybody, so as not to give myself and my parents away, I kept it well inside of me. But the minute I put one foot on that port, on that pier, I looked. I looked to find my parents, and they were nowhere around. So I remember a man was standing next to me, and I turned around and I said, "Where's my mother? Where's my father?" And the truth would have been, I don't know, and nobody else in this world does. But they lied to me, and they said, next port, next thing, next village, next city, next place. And finally, after riding in a Jeep from one place to the other, there were no modern roads at that time, so it took a long time to get from Haifa to Jerusalem. And I burst into tears. I just started screaming, "I want my mother, I want my mother." And I still remember somebody putting a piece of banana in my mouth. You see, in Lithuania, in Europe, bananas were like, what do I know, the most, caviar was, I think, less expensive than a banana in that part of the world. And so it took me 30 years to be able to eat a banana, because just the smell of it made me gag from that moment. And the next thing I knew, we were in a Jeep and then in another car, and it was already nightfall. And I don't remember this, but my foster sister does, and she remembers it, that I said, "Stop lying to me. I know I'm an orphan." And that very same night, I started calling Miriam Ima, which is Hebrew for mother. and I was sure my parents were gone and never coming back. I remember that moment when they took me out of the car. Somebody picked me up and ran me to the house and took me to an old lady who was in bed, and it was Miriam's mother. And she started, Gitale, Gitale. And I said, I'm not Gitale, and I'm not your granddaughter. And I was very upset.
Do you remember what people said to you to try to comfort you at this time?
I don't think anybody really tried to comfort me. I think, we had gone through so much. Everybody has gone through so very much. I don't think people were aware of of children's feelings.
Where did you ultimately go when you stopped going from Jeep to car to where were you settling?
Well, we settled in Jerusalem, in what was then the yeshiva too. That's where they came to learn, and there was Miriam's father and mother lived there, and it was a small house, so we were overcrowded. And I never knew which bed I was going to sleep in, which room. But I felt that I was, I wasn't afraid, although there was still shooting at night. I remember going under the bed many, many times and praying with my foster sister, who was only 2 years older than me. And because there was a lot of unrest in Palestine at that time between the British and the Arabs and us. And I remember we made a pilgrimage. We walked from the new city to the old city, to the citadel, and I went to the wall. I saw the wall in 1945, 46. This was already 46. We went. And I remember I was just jumping around, and, I was a kid. I was 5.5. And I remember one of the rabbis there turned me around to face the wall and said, stop carrying on. Better cry for your parents and the 6 million Jews.
So does that mean by this point you already knew about the 6 million or?
I guess at this point I knew that all the Jews had been killed, all the Jews, and that I considered my parents gone.
While all this was happening with you, your travels through Europe and then into Palestine, what was happening with your parents?
Well, my mother was liberated at the end of January of 45. She had been in Stutthof concentration camp, which was near Danzig in Poland, and had been on the death march. They had been taken to a sub-camp in that area, and she survived the death march, and they had been placed in that sub-camp. And then on January 31st, there was no roll call, no screaming, no carrying on from the Nazis, guards. So little by little, the women started coming out of the barracks, and then they saw the Russian army coming in, and they were liberated. But the Russians had hardly anything themselves. I mean, my mother said that when she saw who the Russian army was, she was surprised they had won, because she said that they were almost kids that had been taken into the army, that the rifles were taller than they were. And they had all these women that they had to take, that they were in charge of. They didn't just set them free. They took them to a camp in a place called Chechochinik near Danzig that was like they had those special spa waters, mineral waters, springs, mineral springs. And so they were there. I mean, they did not harm them, but they were still not free. They were still now under the Russian regime. And my mother was very sick from malnutrition. She had frostbite from walking in the snow with hardly any, you couldn't call them shoes. And she was in the Russian hospital there. And then when she came out of the hospital, a young man came to the camp looking for his girlfriend. See, the Nazis were so methodical that you could kind of follow their route. So all the women that were left in the Kovno ghetto, they had all been taken to Stutthof, and he was looking for his girlfriend. So he figured if she survived, this is where she would be. So he came there, and the women were milling around. Where do you come from? I come from Kovno. Who's left? He was in hiding. Who was left in hiding with you? And he starts enumerating people, and he mentions, and there is the Rebbetzin Schulman, Miriam Schulman. She saved her children and other children, and she's now on her way to Palestine with her children. And do you remember the red-headed guy who was in charge of the bread distribution in the ghetto? She's got his child too. And my mother fainted. That was the first news that my mother had that I had survived. So my mom started making her plans. And a few days later, he told her that he was going back to Kovno to see if he could find his girlfriend. Maybe she was there, and he hadn't found her. And his aunt was a doctor in the hospital where my mother had been, the Russian hospital. So he said, I'll verify about your daughter, and I will send a telegram to my aunt to let you know. But I know that their plans were that they were going to Lodz, the city of Lodz, to first, and that's where they would be. So he sent that telegram with 2 words in Polish, Doczka gar, which means daughter lives. So my mother made her plans, and she escaped the camp the very next day. Right in front of the guards with the machine guns, she told them that she was going to the well to get water, and she made a run for it. She hid in somebody's garden, a little house in the village. And when, darkness fell, she knocked on their door and begged them, and finally they took her in. And they were very nice to her. And a few days later, when they felt they weren't looking for her anymore, they took her to the village, and there she got on a broken down bus and train, and from one thing and the other, no money, no documents, sick, whatever. My mother made the trek through Europe and finally got to Lodz. And when she got to Lodz, she went to the joint distribution, which kept tabs on the people who had survived. And she found that they told her we were already on the boat. we had already sailed for Palestine. My mother came out of there and she was crying because all she had was her torn shoes, the dress, no underwear, no money, sick, and she could not swim the ocean. She figured she'll never, ever see me again. She had not inquired about my father because when she got liberated and she was told who had died the first day, the first week in the camp, the second week, there were all people who were, laborers or young and strong, and my father had a nervous stomach, was a chain smoker, and hadn't done any physical work in his life. So she figured he's gone. I mean, and he wasn't on the list. But she was standing in a street in Lodz when these two young men, still boys, recognized her, passed her and recognized her and said, "Aren't you Riva Bekovich? Your husband is alive. He's in Germany. He's in Munich working for the Americans. And he knows you are alive because there are lists and all that. We're going there. We couldn't find our parents anywhere. We're going back. Come with us." And that's how my mother started her trek to reunite with my father, who knew that she would be smart enough to come to him and not have him come to the Russian part of Europe, which was a one-way street. And my mother and these two boys walked, took broken down trains, broken down buses, broken down trucks, whatever method they could find. They stole bicycles, they rolled down hills, and they got to the border that separated the area, Munich, the Russian sector and the American sector. And we had a deal with the Russians. We were still friends with them then, before the Cold War, that if you didn't have documents that showed that you lived in the Munich area before the war, you were sent back to the Russian sector. So of course, these three people had nothing that was even close to documents. And so they were taken off the train and put on a train going back to the Russian sector. And these two guys and my mother climbed to the roof of the train. And when the train they had been taken off passed them, they jumped from one moving train to the other. And that's how my mom got reunited with my dad. My dad had survived by a hair Dachau concentration camp. He was not liberated by Eisenhower troops. He was already out of the camp. They had taken a whole bunch of inmates and put them on a train, probably to shoot them someplace else or leave them to die someplace else. He was already, my father was 5'10" and he weighed 80 pounds at liberation. So they figured, take a whole bunch of them and just get rid of the corpses somehow. And the train my father was on was being bombed by the Americans. So the guards didn't want to die. So they said, "Raus, raus." And they hid in the forest. So it was raining, it was April, and it was really miserable, but then the bombing stopped. So the guard said, and I still remember my father telling me the story. The guards came and said, "Bitte, bitte, come back to the trains." And my father said, the word "bitte," please, in German. He hadn't heard that from a German in years. Things must be very bad for them when they're saying "bitte." And so he didn't come back to the train, and so others stayed in the forest. And they could see the lights of the village on the other side of the forest, but they did not know whether the Americans were already in that particular village, had taken it over, or that it was still in German hands. So they stayed until hunger and every, and the wetness, the dampness took over, and one man came running into the forest saying that, yelling, "You're free, Jews, you're free, come to the village." And my father didn't know if he was hallucinating or not, or just, from the hunger and everything else. And the man had a big black bread that he was carrying, and my father tested him to see if he was telling the truth or not. And he said, "Okay, if the Americans are still there, there's plenty of bread. Will you give me the bread?" He said, "Sure." And my father said if he was giving up his bread, it was true. And so he walked into the village, and that's how he got liberated. And he spoke English, so he started working for the Americans in the displaced person camp in the outskirts of Munich. And he had found out, also by word of mouth and by list, that my mother was alive and that I was alive, that Miriam had saved a bunch of children, and we were all on the way to Palestine. My father's brothers, all of them with the exception of one brother and my father, had left for Cuba when my father was like 14 years old, 16. And so he had made himself remember one address of one of his brothers. And he had sent letters through the Red Cross telling them that I existed, that, we were alive, that I was on my way to Palestine or was in Palestine, to please find me, to make sure I was okay. And, the letters it was right after the war. It was, the mail was almost impossible from Europe. And somehow somebody took a letter to Paris and mailed it from Paris, and it came to Cuba. That one arrived, but the brother, he was right, the one address he had remembered, that brother had died suddenly of a heart attack, and his family had moved from that address. But the Cubans are very nice people, and the mailman kept thinking, look at the stamps, they are so unusual. I'm not gonna just take it back. There is a Jewish person who has a store in the area. Maybe he knows the family. I'm gonna go take it to them. So he did, and this man didn't know my uncle, my other uncle, and he called him and he said, okay, so the widow had relatives. My uncle's widow had relatives in Paris. Maybe it's from them. He said, just open the letter. Tell me who signs it. And the man did, and he said, your brother Zalman. And that's how my family in Cuba found out we were alive and that I existed. And my uncle immediately started doing, papers for my parents, and contacted family that we had in Israel, cousins. And he made papers so that my parents could leave Germany, and they went to Paris, and he got them in Paris, brought them to Cuba. Because everything was, documentation in Europe. It was impossible almost. If he hadn't had some pull in Cuba, it would have been impossible. And nobody was going to getting papers for Palestine. It was so difficult, because it was still a British mandate. And so he brought them to Cuba. My father was too sick to travel, but the family accompanied my mother to New York, and there she found the one method of getting to Palestine was on a mercantile marine ship. And that's how they got reunited. And then came that part that when I was told that my parents were alive. And that it happened today. I remember Miriam called me over, and she was sitting in the dining room, and she said, I got this in the mail. And it's a picture. And tell me if you know who these people are. And I said, I don't know who this man is. It was my uncle, or one of my uncles, my mother's brother. I said, I remember how my heart skipped a beat. And I pointed and I said, this is my mother. This was my mother. And if the man in the picture had red hair, that was my father. And Miriam embraced me. And she said, they still are. They are your parents. They're alive, and they're coming to get you. And I didn't believe her. I did not believe her. Been lied to before. But then a package came, and there was a ring for me and a ring for my foster sister, Abigail, and a little toy. And it was hard to believe.
Before we go much further, I want to ask you, when did your relatives move to Cuba?
My
And why?
relatives started moving to Cuba. One of my father's eldest brother moved there first. And then I had one other brother move there. Then there was my father's sister moved there. Then another brother who had lost a child in Lithuania to scarlet fever needed a change of place, and he left on the last boat that went out of Italy before the war, and he came to Cuba. So the only ones that were left was my father in Kovno and a brother of his in Tavrik, Lithuania. Oh, it's a town. It was about maybe a couple hundred miles from Kovno. He was left with his family, with his two daughters and wife. Their son, my cousin Abrasha, he was living with us. But you know what happened in those towns. They killed everybody. So that family didn't make it. But then my parents and I were reunited, the three of us in Cuba, in February of my mother came to Israel. We had to wait because all of a sudden Cuba decided that they were not giving me the documentation I needed to get into Cuba. They didn't want any more people in Cuba, Jews, whatever. But my uncle's lawyer's wife was very friendly with a senator. And she went out, senator's wife, and she went out with her and showed her my picture, and somehow the papers materialized. And on February 6th of 1947, I was reunited with my father in Cuba. And it was a miracle, the three of us. Because Lithuania in Kovno, only like 2,000 people out of the 38,000 or 40,000 survived. And only about 150 children under the age of 12 survived. So it was a total miracle that the three of us, the family, left intact.
Can you tell us about the moment that you were reunited with your mother and your father and what that moment was like for you?
Oh boy. Well, what happened was that when my mother arrived in Israel, I was not living at Miriam's. I had spent time with relatives. I had relatives from my father's side in Tel Aviv, and I had been there, but they brought me back to Jerusalem because, rightly so, Miriam said when her mother picks her up, it will be from me. And it was the right thing. But Miriam's mother had had another stroke. The house was very small, and they couldn't have little children running around. So they sent my foster sister Abigail to some relatives, and I was at somebody's friend of the family, I don't even remember her name, living in her place at the time my mother came, and it was in the old city of Jerusalem, the citadel. And I had been told that my mother was coming, but I didn't believe it. And part of me was, I want her to come, and part of me was ambivalent about even trusting whatever I was being told. So I remember very, very clearly that I was getting a bath in a tub when my oldest foster sister and foster brother came, and they whispered something into the woman's ear, and I heard the word mother. I said, "Is it about my mother?" And they said, no, Ima, mother in Hebrew, wants to speak to you. Why? I haven't done anything. When Ima spoke to you, it was to reprimand usually because you had not, you hadn't behaved the way you should. I've been good. I haven't done a thing. Said, no, come on. And we walked. I guess we didn't have that much money for buses and stuff. And we walked to the other side, to the new city. And I still remember we went in to buy me some sandals. And they were white sandals. And I said, Ima is not going to be happy about the shoes you're buying me because these are not going to last. And we didn't have money, so they said, no, it's okay. But why does Ima want to see me? I don't know, she'll tell you. And I came running around the bed screaming, Ima, I'm here and I haven't done anything bad. And I came around the bend of the house, and then this lady in a blue dress came out, and she stopped in her track. My mother was coming out to see where was I? Why wasn't I being brought to her? And I stopped in mine. I mean, it was a shock. And then she opened her arms, and I flew into them. I recognized her immediately. And then I froze. And then came the tough part. Because first I didn't have a mother, now I had two. Took time to, it was difficult. It was very difficult for both women. And I remember my mother would say to me, come on, let's go and I'll buy you an ice cream cone. And I loved ice cream. And I would turn around to Miriam and say, Ima, can I go with my real mother to get ice cream? So, it was a tough situation. And I think the two women were jealous of each other. And as a matter of fact, they converged many years later in New York when I was living in New York. In the first summer I was there, and Miriam came to visit her daughter, Abigail, who was living in New York, and my mother came to visit me. And I remember there was friction there. I mean, my mother was so ever grateful to Miriam, but I could tell. It was. And then I came to Cuba and I became a princess. I had all this family, all these cousins whom I adored, who adored me, my aunts and uncles, and it was a charmed childhood from there on.
Can you share with us your reunion with your father?
Yes, my father was very, very skinny then. And I still remember when we finally got to Havana. I mean, it was from New York to Miami, layover for hours in Miami. And then finally the plane landed in Havana, and we were in customs and sitting, waiting for them to call our name to get out of customs. And there was a wall separating, customs from the rest of the airport, and the wall did not touch the ceiling. There was an opening, and my father was trying to just show his face, and Mama said, "There's your daddy, there's your daddy." And we came out of customs, and then I remember he went like on his knees to embrace me, and I remember how his body was shaking with the sobs. He was sobbing so. He was all bones. And I cried too. And then somebody later said, "You were crying because you were happy to see your daddy?" I said, "He was crying, so I cried too. When grown-ups cry, you cry. When they laugh, you laugh." That's how wise I was. And then I remember the whole family had come, and my uncle brought a shiny car. I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. And I know it was a Buick, and it was blue, and it was gorgeous. And, in those times, the cars were very big. You could pile up a lot of people. I was in the back seat, sitting on my father's lap. And then I asked a question, and everybody laughed. And I couldn't understand why they were laughing. I thought my question was very to the point. And the question was, I wanted to know if the taxi was my uncle's or he leased it from somebody. I had never met anybody who owned a car. I thought very smart, very normal question. And, I bonded with my father a lot quicker than I did with my mother. He had gone through a lot, but somehow he was able to put my feelings on top of his list. And he was much more understanding I had some temper tantrums. I was very willful at times. My mother between the two of them, between my father and my mother, they lost 22 members of their family. And I had to start a new life in a new place with a terrible climate. You know, coming from a place like Lithuania to a place to the tropics. And air conditioning was not the norm in those days. But it was a good life. And it was a good extended family. And we stayed there until Castro came. And then my parents sent me out again. I was one of the first ones to leave Cuba for my family. And my parents felt that if Castro would stop people from leaving Cuba, the first ones would be still students, people young enough to brainwash, and did not want me to go through being a semi-prisoner again. So when Castro declared himself a communist, and I was told I had 4 days to pack and get out. And I came to Miami.
When was this?
1960, July of 1960.
Before we have you leave Cuba, is there anything else you would like to share with us about your time there? And could you put it into a time frame? When did you arrive? You just told us when you left.
I arrived in Cuba on February 6, 1947, and I left on July 13th, 1960.
Did you witness any anti-Semitism in Cuba?
Not really. Not really. A little girl told me when I was still, maybe had been in Cuba a couple of years at the most, said her grandmother didn't want her to play with me because I was Jewish. And I said, why? I thought, when I came to Cuba, and I tell this a lot, especially when I speak to children, my world was so divided. It was us Jewish people and the enemy. That was it. Because even in Israel, the Arabs were the enemy, the British were the enemy, So I come there, and we moved to this it was a new area, and into an apartment, and all the neighbors were crazy about me and loved me and brought me little gifts and treats, and my parents got along with everybody. And so I figured, here I was, my world is Christians, Jewish people and the enemy. So all these people are so good to me. The whole of Cuba is Jewish, as far as I'm concerned. Until Christmas came, of course, and then, I couldn't have a Christmas tree, and that was a whole to-do. But that's when I realized, and that there is goodness in everybody. But that little girl told me that her grandmother wouldn't let her play with me. Because why? Why Jews? Because Jews killed Jesus Christ. And I said, and who was he? I had no idea. So I said, it's impossible. Jews don't kill anybody. Jews get killed. They don't kill. So she took me to her grandmother, who read me from a book. It was in print. And to me, anything that was in print was 100%, because the only thing, I still didn't know how to read and write, so the only thing I had ever seen was the Bible, and special books for children and stuff like that, all religious. So I said, okay, I was really very upset. So I came and I told my father, and he said, okay, so what did you say? And I told him, I said, well, Daddy, I had to admit it because it was in print. I mean, it was in a book. They say it was in their Bible. And so I told them, okay, so, all right, the Jews killed, but it wasn't the Lithuanian Jews. And that's how I got out of it. So that was my very first experience. My second experience was when I was like about 14. I had a teacher in school who didn't like me. I went to a very progressive school, an American school, and I didn't know why she just didn't like me. Uh, I got along with everybody. I was a pretty normal kid. And one day, and she always had this test, this quick one-question tests on Fridays, and then she would discuss it on Monday. And that Monday she came and she said, it was terrible what you kids did last Friday. Nobody has really paid any attention. And you, and she turned to me, you wrote equator with a in Spanish with a Q instead of a C. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Doctora, we called our teachers. They had a doctor degree. It's the influence of English. I was taking Spanish high school and English high school simultaneously. She says, I don't care if it was English influence or Jewish influence. I said, oh, now I know why she doesn't like me. And I went to my father. And I said, look, Daddy, what happened? Are you going to go talk to the principal? He said, nope. I said, what do you mean? He says, you're going to go and talk to the teacher or the principal. You're going to encounter this problem throughout your life, and you're going to have to deal with it. And you're either going to be upfront about it or not. But this is the only thing I can give you, is to make you ready for whatever comes. And I still remember how dry my mouth was when I stayed after class, because I was basically a little shy, and to talk to this woman and to confront her. And I said to her that I never knew why she didn't like me, but that I had found out a few days before, and that it was that she was anti-Semitic, but that I was going to stay in her class, and it was her problem and not mine. And she kept saying, oh, no, please don't. I said, I'm not going to the principal. This is your problem and not mine. And I became her pet. I had her again 2 years later, my junior year, and I could do no wrong. But that is the only time I ever felt anything in Cuba.
What did being Jewish mean to you at this point, given all your experiences in Europe and then in Palestine and in Cuba? What did being Jewish mean for you?
It was being different from the majority of people. But being Jewish has always seemed something to be very proud of, because I think we're a very strong people. We're a people who have survived a lot of hatred. And I think in general, we don't carry that hatred in us. And we try to do good, and we have given the world the best of us. There are plenty of Jewish people who are nasty, SOBs, I'm sure. But I find I I like most of the people that I have met. I love what my parents were, and a lot of it had to do with their belief in the goodness of man. My parents were true survivors. They got their bodies, but they never got their soul.
So you left Cuba and went to, you said, Miami. What were your expectations of the United States, and what were your first impressions of the United States?
I had been in the United States as a tourist before, and as a matter of fact, I had been in for about 2 months in New York. The university in Cuba was closed at that time, so I stayed with relatives in New York. And it was a fun place, a place where you could go shopping. There was so much shopping in America. And I spoke fluent English because my mother sent me to an American school. And when I came to Miami, it was supposedly for a very short time because Cuba would open up. We've expected America would never allow communism to come 90 miles off the coast of the United States. So I came middle of July. My parents came to see me in September, and I had gotten a job. And they left back end of September, and on October, I think it was 20th, all the major businesses in Cuba were confiscated by Castro's regime. And my father came back to Miami a day later. My mother stayed packing up stuff and came a couple of weeks later. And then when, the realization that I couldn't go back, that there was no home, that's when it hit me.
Where did your family settle in the United States?
Well, my parents came to Charlotte. I stayed in Miami. And then I came to Charlotte. And Charlotte was it was 1962, end of 62. Was a small, it was still a small town. And my uncle, the one who brought us to Cuba, got killed in a car accident in November of 62. And that was a terrible blow for the whole family. And I stayed here until February of the following year. And my father kicked me out, said, "This is not a place for you." And there was no money for me to go to school. You couldn't go to City College or anything like that because you had to be a resident. And I came first as a tourist and then as a refugee. And because I was born in Lithuania, the quota was closed. So I couldn't apply. So I was really stateless. And so I couldn't go to college. So I left. My father really said, "You got to go to New York." And so I went to New York and I got a job using my Spanish in an export company. And I remember I called my dad, sprung for the money to call, to say I got a job, a very high position. And he said, "Really? How much are they paying you?" And I said, $70 a week. He said, "What's so great about that? You were making almost that money in Miami." And I said, "I'm on the 75th floor of the Empire State Building. I can't go much higher than that." And I stayed there for 21 years. And I became, I ended up continuing the business on my own in export until I came here to get involved in my dad's business with my husband.
When you came to the United States, how many languages did you speak?
Well, only Yiddish, my mother tongue. I had forgotten my Hebrew, and Spanish and English.
Did anybody in Cuba or in the United States ask you about your early years in the ghetto and what you went through during the war?
Nobody in Cuba knew about it of my friends. The ones that asked me was my family, my aunts, my uncles. I would tell the story when I was a child, but then I stopped talking about it altogether. I guess I didn't want to be different. And never spoke about it here in the United States. And I started speaking publicly in schools when I was 50 years old. My father passed away suddenly, and his banker came to the office to give me his condolences. And he said, you know, your father had promised my son that he would come to his 7th grade and tell his story. Will you do it for him? And how could I say no? So I went, and when I saw the reaction of the kids and the letters that I got afterwards, I realized that I must continue doing so.
You mentioned your husband. What did you tell your family? Your husband, your children, grandchildren. What did you tell them about your early years?
Well, I had no children. I married late in life. I was 40 years old. And my husband was a lot older than I was. He fooled me, didn't tell me the truth about his age. And I didn't have to tell my husband much because my husband was in World War II. He liberated Nordhausen, his battalion liberated Nordhausen concentration camp in Austria. So he knew. He didn't talk about it, but he knew.
You mentioned earlier flashbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you now, have you experienced flashbacks or nightmares about your childhood?
I have had no nightmares, but I have had flashbacks, and I have had times when, you know, it comes, it's difficult to explain, but when we first moved here, Richard, my husband, he would still have his business in New York, and he was not, he loved to drive, and he would drive back and forth to New York, and he would leave usually on a Sunday morning, very, very early, almost at dawn, and to avoid traffic. And that day, I would be very, very down. And I'm usually not a person who gets depressed, but I would have a very depressing day. And at the beginning, my father would say to me, are you worried, you know, because of my uncle in a car accident? He'll be fine. He'll be fine. I'd say, no, it's just a funny, dark, heavy mood. And then one day, it just came out without my even realizing it. He was leaving the next day, and I said, would you please, again and again, I've asked you to wake me before you leave. He said, I'm leaving at 4 a.m. It's Sunday. You can sleep. Please wake me. You don't understand. I said, when I wake up, the way the light comes in here in this bedroom, it's like in the basement when I woke up all alone. And it came out. And that was the mood the whole day. So I guess it's in the subconscious, very deeply buried there.
Have you ever been back to Europe, to some of the places where you were before?
No, never. I have never gone back to Lithuania. My dad made me promise. He said, don't go there. It's covered with our blood. And, you know, the Lithuanians killed. I just found out there were only 1,000 Nazis that came to Lithuania. And there were 95% of the Jewish population was killed in Lithuania. And a lot of it was killed at the hands of the Lithuanians. So there's nothing to go back to. I mean, the ghetto was burned and dynamited. I was 8 months old when I left the city. I don't even know the address of where we lived. And no, and I haven't been back to Cuba either. Go forward. I go forward.
What is it like for you to be an American?
I think it's wonderful. I think you have to be coming from a different place to really, really realize what a wonderful country this has been. For me, anyways. It's a country of opportunity. It's a country where you can express yourself. So many people express themselves a little too much in many bad ways with guns, but it's a wonderful, wonderful country, and I'm very grateful.
What are your thoughts about the situation in Israel since October 7th?
It's very, very horrible. What happened was just terrible. I pray, I go to sleep with a prayer for everybody in Israel. And I wake up with that same thought. I am very upset that it happened. I'm upset that people who are innocent are getting killed. And I'm more than upset that there has been such horrible reactions from a lot of population and university population and young population against Israel, against Jewish people in general, and that everybody can be at war, but when Israel is at war, we are all of a sudden killers. I mean, this is war. What happened, in my opinion, was Israel's Pearl Harbor. And the United States, we defended. And we defended that attack. And I pray for it to be over.
Before we conclude, what have we not talked about that you would like to add?
Well, the girls that are from the Butterfly Project that we do at the JCC, it's a wonderful program that I am very involved with, in which we bring in children from schools and tell them with lessons about the Holocaust, and they listen to a survivor tell their story and have the opportunity to to ask questions and get answers from somebody who's real and went through it. And they mentioned to me that when, I tell them that I have one photograph of me at the age of 3. All the photographs were burned with the ghetto and everything else. I have lots of photographs because of my family before, because one of my aunts left Lithuania, my mother's sister, and went to South Africa. And so her siblings kept sending photos. So I have, and then my grandmother had a sister, my paternal grandmother had a sister in Yonkers, New York. So she got some photographs. So I have those. But I have this one photograph of me with my very first haircut, okay? And I was very upset. It was my very first bad hair day. And it's the it was taken so that my father could take this. It was taken in the ghetto, and you had to be very careful because you were not allowed to have cameras. So this one person had a camera and took the photo, and this is the photo my father took from place to place of people when he interviewed people who would be possible saviors. The reason I have this photograph is because when my father got to Dachau, they were easing off on some of their restrictions there because they were already losing the war. Father got there in July of 1944. So they were losing the war, and they were also building a underground hangar for planes in Dachau, and they needed the slave labor. So they allowed the inmates that were coming in to keep 2 items. So most of the men were keeping their watch and whatever. My father gave up his watch to keep my photograph because he felt that the watch might buy him some extra rations, but that would go, and the photograph would allow him to hang on and live another day. So that's how I get the photograph. But I am not a happy camper on that photograph. And my father always said it because I was scared of the camera. I had never seen one. That was not it. I had just been taken to a barber, and they had cut my locks. I had beautiful long hair, and I was a very unhappy camper. Still remember the day.
I have one more question for you. What message do you have for future viewers of this interview?
Don't let my message is that don't let hate ever, ever get into your heart. Just consider that we're all the same. We can pray to a different God. We can have different color eyes, different color skin, but good people are good people. And just take that word and just burn it someplace far away from you, because it destroys you. It doesn't destroy the object of your dislike. Be good to one another. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Spielberg.
Can you please tell us who is this person?
This is my mother, Riva, um, when she was about 20 years old.
And her last name?
At that time, Levner, Levner.
And do you know when or where the photo was taken?
It was taken in Kovno, Lithuania, 1935, 36.
Thank you. And who is this, please?
This is my father, Zalman Bejkovic, probably at the age also of 20, 21.
And do you know when or where the photo was taken?
The photo was taken in Kovno, Lithuania. I would say he must have been about 21 years old, so it would have been 1932, 33.
Thank you. And who is this?
This is my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, Sarah Minda Bajkovic. And she's the one who made the prophecy that because I was born on the first day of the Jewish New Year on Rosh Hashanah, I would be lucky all my life.
And do you know when or where the photo was taken?
I don't. I don't know where it was taken or if it was in Kovno or in another city, nor do I know her age at that time.
Okay, thank you. And who are these people?
And the younger child is me, and the girl standing next to me is Reisa Lefin, who was in the same house in the ghetto that we were in. And this was taken on my third birthday, which would have been October 3rd, 1943, in the ghetto, the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania.
And your full name, please?
Shulamit Bajkovic Chenkin.
Thank you. What are we looking at here?
This is our basically traveling document permitting us to go to Palestine. This is Miriam, myself, Shulamit, and my two foster sisters, Esther and Abigail.
And can you give everybody's last name, please?
It's Miriam Schulman, Abigail and Esther Schulman.
And your last name?
Bajkovic.
Thank you. Can you please tell us about this picture?
This is the picture that was shown to me by Miriam Schulman, and I was asked, do you know who these people are? And picture that I recognize my mother and father.
And your parents' names, please? Can you tell?
Riva and Zalman Bajkovic.
And do you know when or where the photo was taken?
The photo was taken in Munich, Germany, on August 15, 1945.
Thank you. And can you tell us about this photo, please?
This is the very first photograph that I have of my mother and me taken in Tel Aviv. My mother, Riva Bajkovic, myself, Shulamit Bajkovic. It was taken in 1946, probably October 1946.
Thank you. And this photo, please.
This is the very first photo with my father after being reunited in Havana, Cuba. My father, Zalman Bajkovic, and myself, Shulamit Bajkovic, was taken in the American Temple in Havana. I don't know the exact date, but it was sometimes in 1947, February 1947.
Thank you. And these people, who are these people?
Miriam Schulman and myself, Shulamit Bajkovic, taken in Israel sometimes in 1968.
Thank you. And can you tell us about this photo, please?
My parents, Riva and Zalman Bajkovic, and myself, Shulamit, taken on my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, August 9th, 1989.
And where was it taken?
In Charlotte, North Carolina.
Thank you. And please tell us about this picture.
My husband, Richard Schenkin, and I, Shulamit Bajkovic Schenkin, taken in the summer of 1984.
Where?
In New York City.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this concludes the interview today.
Thank you.